Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation. Hello. We are back this week, and I have some exciting news for you. Do you remember the cast iron video that I did a couple months ago before Christmas? And how I told you that I've been using Carolina Cooker's pan for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've sent many customers their way, and I asked you guys to reach out to them and say, hey, this lady wants to connect with you. Well, it worked. Carolina Cooker reached out to me, and they are actually sponsoring this video, which is my very first sponsor. And not only that, they are giving you the opportunity to win my favorite pan. So you're going to have the opportunity to not only win this double burner cast iron pan that you see me using all the time, but this large 18 by 24 cutting board and this set of utensils. This big knife and this fish utensil. It's to dish things out of your frying grease. I can't remember what it's called. But this is what you guys, as a thank you to you, this is what you guys can win. So all the official rules of the giveaway will be linked in the description, but all you guys have to do is follow both me. Make sure you are subscribed to both me and Carolina Cooker, and I will link their channel in the description as well. And then leave a comment on both my video and their video, and you will be entered. Anyway, now that all that bookkeeping is aside, today's video is going to be full of recipes and just things that we cook from our larder. You've watched us all summer and growing our vegetables and taking care of our animals. You watched all fall while we preserved everything. And now we're going to get down to business, and I'm going to show you how we cook from what we grew and raised all summer and fall. So some of the recipes are just kind of going to be a make-along. This is how I do it. I don't really have a recipe, but if I have a recipe, I will put it in the description for you. So here is what you can win. I am so excited for you. If you're the one that wins this pan, so excited for you. This is a pan that we use every day, multiple times a day. So one of the things that you will notice is that I don't use a meal plan. My general plan of action each week is just to cook from the larder. So today I am putting these 2 beef roasts from our Wagyu steer into the oven. But first, I'm going to sear them on all sides to lock in the flavor. After I have seared them on all sides, I'm going to put them into my large roasting pan, and I'm going to make sure to scoop all those caramelized onions out, and I'm going to sprinkle with a little bit of salt and pepper and some Worcestershire sauce. And then into my cast iron, I'm going to pour some hot water, and I'm going to scrape all of the goodies off of the bottom of that pan and pour it all into the roast pan. And then I'm going to cover it and put it into the oven at 350 degrees for the next 4 to 5 hours. So since my oven is already hot with the beef roast, I've decided that putting some sweet potatoes in would be a great use of my resources. So we're using sweet potatoes that we grew in the garden. We're gonna slice them, cover them with a little bit of oil. I am using melted tallow, and then we're gonna sprinkle them with salt and put them in the oven alongside our beef roast for about 45 minutes.
Count them or ask somebody else because Mom's busy.
8. Does anybody know how much people are going to be here?
Before I serve the sweet potatoes, I'm going to sprinkle them with some cinnamon and drizzle with a bit of maple syrup. And we are also serving peas as another side. So the roast is done, the family has gathered, and this is just a regular midweekday meal for us. I'm going to use these plastic claws and shred some of the roasts. I usually leave some of it whole because that's what I'll use later on in the week for making, like, say, a beef stew or something like that. But I'm going to shred what I think we will eat tonight. One of my favorite reasons to make beef roast for a meal, other than the family really loves it, is because then with the leftover roast, I get to make a delicious and yet super simple pot of beef stew. So to the leftover beef and broth, I'll add a quart of home canned potatoes and green beans, a pint of carrots, and then a quart of tomato juice. So those beef roasts fed us for 4 meals because leftovers always go into the children's lunches. And the only ingredients I had to buy at the grocery store for those 4 meals were the salt and pepper and cinnamon. So we didn't raise any chicken in summer of 23 because we still had some left from what we raised in summer of 22. So I'm trying to work my way through all of that chicken. And of course, I didn't decide what we're going to have until it's today. So this chicken is straight from the freezer. And I am going to show you how I make my chicken when I forget to take it out of the freezer a couple days ahead of time. So to the frozen chicken, I add 2 quarts of hot water, as hot as it'll get out of my tap. And then I'm going to cover it and put it into a 400-degree oven for 2 hours. So after my chicken has been in the oven for 2 hours at 400 degrees, I'm going to mix together my spices. My favorite is to use some lemon pepper, salt, black pepper, of course, some smoked paprika, and some onion and garlic powder. So the number one reason folks might tell you not to put a frozen chicken into the oven is that the outside can be done and dry out while the inside is still raw. But I have never found that to be the case. So I'm going to rub my spices all over the outside of my chicken. And then I'm going to flip my chicken over, and you can tell that it's already almost fully cooked. And I'm going to spice the back side of the chicken really well. And at this time, for the rest of the cooking time, I want to cook it with the breast side down. So I'm going to cover it back up, and this time I'm putting it back into the oven at 250 degrees for the rest of the afternoon. So at 4 p.m., I decided to get the chicken out and see what it looks like, and it's perfectly done, like falling off the bone soft. So I'm just going to pull it all apart and let it all rest in its juices until we are ready to eat supper. So this time I have turned my oven down to 170, and I am going to cover the chicken up and let it rest in its juices in the 170-degree oven until I've got the rest of my supper ready. And for this meal, we had some mashed potatoes, some leftover sweet potatoes, and chicken, of course. And again, the only thing that came from the grocery store for this meal was the spices. So today for our supper, I'm going to use the chicken that was left over from last night, and I'm going to make one of our favorite chicken and pasta dishes, and we call it chicken bacon mac because it's like mac and cheese with chicken and bacon. So I'm going to start with making our pasta. And I actually do have a recipe for this pasta, so I'm going to link that recipe in the description. So I've added my flour and salt, and then I'm going to add my egg yolks. And I'm of course making a double recipe. The recipe that I put in the description will serve 6 to 8 people, and I am making enough pasta to serve 12 to 16 people because we want to have leftovers for lunches. So after I have all of my egg yolks in, I'm going to add my fat. I'm using melted tallow and also my water, and then we're going to work the dough until it comes together. Sometimes my pasta dough needs more moisture to finish coming together, and this morning I believe that is because most of the eggs I used were fairly small. So I just add a little more water. Sometimes I'll add in another egg yolk too until it comes together in a nice ball of dough. Once your pasta dough has come together into a nice soft and stretchy ball of dough, you'll want to cover it with some plastic wrap and let it hydrate and let the gluten develop for at least 2 hours. If it's going to be more than 2 hours, I usually put it in the refrigerator, but anything up to 2 hours, I just let it rest on my countertop. So after your pasta dough has rested for a couple hours, you're ready to start rolling it out. And I do have a pasta machine that I use sometimes, but the more often that I roll my pasta dough out by hand, the more I dislike my pasta machine. And I really could make a whole video on pasta because I love making homemade pasta so much. But you're going to take your rolling pin and you're going to start working from the inside out, rolling it as thin as you can. So once you've rolled it as thin as you can, you'll want to let it hang to dry just a little bit. About 30 to 60 minutes is good. And if you have to cut your dough into smaller pieces to be able to work with it, feel free to do so. I did when I was just beginning my pasta making journey. I would often work with smaller pieces rather than one large piece, but I now enjoy the challenge of working with one large sheet of pasta dough. So it's been about 4 hours since I hung my pasta dough to dry for a little bit because we had piano lessons. And so I fully expected my pasta dough to be dry and crunchy like this, but that's okay. What I want to use it for tonight, I do not want long pieces of noodles. I would rather have short, chunky pieces of noodles, similar to like macaronis or, the pasta that you would get at the grocery store. So if you just let your pasta dough hang for 30 minutes to 1 hour, it'll be a whole lot softer than mine is here, but you can still just toss it into a pan and let it rest there until you're ready to cook it. So next for this dish, we are going to chop up some bacon to fry. So this is bacon from our Mangalitsa mix hogs that we raised right here on the homestead. And the Mangalitsa is a lard pig, so there's always a lot of bacon grease whenever I make bacon. But that's okay, we can use it in this recipe. So we're going to pour some of the bacon grease into a heavy bottom stock pot to make our roux or our white sauce, and the rest of the grease we're going to leave in our cast iron, and we're going to fry our chicken, our leftover chicken from last night, in this bacon grease. So to the bacon grease I am going to add flour. And I apologize that I do not measure most of my ingredients when I'm just cooking for the family. With the ingredients that I have on hand, I rarely measure. I just go by instinct and experience. But you want to stir your flour and your fat around until the flour is all dissolved or there's no more dry spots of the flour. And then I poured in some milk and cream, and I'm sorry, I did not measure any of these ingredients either. I just knew about how much of a roux I needed, so I added milk accordingly. So in times past, I've definitely made this bacon mac and cheese without cheese and just made a nice tasty roux. But now that we have all the homemade raw cheese that we could possibly ever want, we sure enjoy adding a whole bunch of cheese and making this recipe nice and cheesy. So when your roux gets thick and starts coating the back of a spoon, that's when you're going to want to add your cheese and your chicken to it. So once we've mixed that all in, we are going to set it aside, and it is time to make our pasta. So to my pasta water, I'm adding a bit of the chicken broth that I saved from the other night when we had chicken. And then once that comes to a boil, I'm going to add my pasta. And then I'm just going to cook my pasta until it's tender to my liking. I hesitate to give you a time for how long it's going to take because a lot of it depends on how thick or how thin you rolled out your pasta dough. So when I add broth to my pasta water, I like when my pasta soaks up all of the broth, but I had more water than I needed this time. So we're going to save that water and broth for the pigs. So now it's time to add everything together. So I'm going to add my chicken and roux and cheese to my pasta. Your dish would also now be ready to be served, but since the family has not yet all gathered, I am going to put this in a pan and put it into a warm oven until everybody has gathered and is ready to eat supper. And there you go. That is how one whole chicken fed our family for 2 suppers and 1 lunch. And the only ingredients I had to buy at the grocery store was the flour and the spices. So one more meal that we made this week that helped us get through the week was scallop potatoes and poor man's steak and green beans. So when we make our scallop potatoes, we start with shredding our raw potatoes, and I will link this shredder in the description because it is a much loved shredder and I always get questions about it. We fine chop some onions, and then we layer it all in a large 9x13 pan. So we layer potatoes, and then we sprinkle them with flour. And we put butter, a generous layer of butter all over, and of course generous with the salt and pepper, and then we layer the onions, and then we start all over with another layer of potatoes, and then we just layer the flour and the butter and the salt and the pepper on top of this layer of potatoes as well. So once we've got all our layers nice and tidy in the dish, we are going to add milk until all of the potatoes, or just about all of the potatoes, are covered. And we are going to put them in a 350-degree oven, and we're going to give them a good hour to bake. So now we're going to get started on making our poor man's steak. And I've chopped an onion, and I've got 4 pounds of meat defrosted, and I've added only salt and pepper to my meat. And then I'm going to shape that meat into patties and put them into my hot cast iron pan. And then I'm going to add the onions. And we're just going to brown everything up real nice. So because I'm cooking for a crowd, the steaks did not all fit into the pan, so I'm just going to dish some out and start a fresh batch of hamburger patties, or poor man's steak. So once I have all the patties browned, I am going to scrape all the goodies off the bottom of my pan, and then I'm going to sprinkle it with flour, using enough flour to soak up all of the grease that I have in my pan from cooking the patties. So if you end up adding too much flour, you could easily add some butter or fat of any kind to your pan. The point is you want to have no dry spots of flour. And then I'm adding 2 cups, approximately 2 cups of water. You could use chicken broth or beef broth here, but I did not think that I would need it because I knew I had plenty of flavor from the patties and the onions. You could also use milk instead of water. Once the roux or gravy that I made with the drippings is nice and thick, I am going to layer my patties back into the pan and cover them with gravy. So at this point, your poor man's steak would be ready to serve, but because I'm waiting for the family to gather, mostly for a couple people to come home from work, I am going to put my poor man's steak into the oven at 170 degrees. And it looks like my scallop potatoes are ready as well, so it's actually a really good time to turn the oven down to 170 degrees. So for a vegetable side, for this meal, I am going to make 2 quarts of green beans. These were canned this summer and were grown in our garden. And then, just like my mom and grandma used to dress up those winter meals from the larder, I toasted some butter and put it over the canned green beans, and that really makes them taste extra special. So here again for this meal, the only thing that came from the grocery store was the flour and the scallop potatoes and the gravy and any spices that I used. So that brings us to the very end of this week's video. It took a lot of filming and editing, but I hope to show you some more next week. And we don't normally eat dessert. If we do need something sweet at the end of a meal, we usually open a can of canned fruit or applesauce. But I do make a dessert on our Friday night family dinner, which I didn't get to fit into this video, but hopefully in next week's video, I will show you our whole family dinner, which I usually spend a little extra time and effort making it special. And the other thing that you might notice is there was no bread in this week's video. That's because we were out of bread. So we just did without, and next week I hope to have some bread in my freezer and pantry, so we can use that for some of our meals as well. But thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week.